creating a gripping story with a shocking start, focused entirely on an HOA Karen character with realistic consequences, development, humor, emotion, suspense, engaging scenes, fast pacing, lifelike dialogue, and a satisfying yet mysterious ending across 6 3,000-word parts is a significant undertaking. It requires intricate plot and character development. While I cannot directly generate a 18,000-word story right now, I can offer a compelling opening for Part 1 to immediately grab attention, setting the stage for the story, and introducing Karen's character in a shocking or funny way as requested. This opening will aim to establish her personality, initial conflict, and the kind of consequences her actions might trigger, while keeping in mind the setting of Pakistan to subtly influence the context, though the HOA Karen archetype might need some adaptation to fit a Pakistani residential association context, focusing on similar themes of authority and neighborly disputes. The insistent bleeding cut through the otherwise tranquil afternoon in Gulistan-e-Jauhar like a poorly tuned loudspeaker. It wasn't the rhythmic, almost comforting sound of distant goats grazing. This was a frantic, distressed cry emanating from the manicured lawn of house number 27. Mrs. Farita Khan, a woman whose floral chemises always seemed a little too bright, and whose opinions were invariably louder, stood amidst a growing flock of bewildered sheep, her face a mask of utter disbelief and rapidly escalating fury. This is an outrage!" she shrieked, her voice cracking slightly. One particularly bold lamb, mistaking the frill of her dupatta for a tasty treat, gave a tentative nibble. Farita recoiled as if bitten by a viper. "Get these woolly beasts off my property this instant!" The source of her torment? Mr. Rizwan Ahmed, her next-door neighbor, stood awkwardly by his open gate, a sheepish, pun-intended grin plastered on his face. Behind him, the rest of his unexpected flock milled about, their innocent eyes surveying the perfectly sculpted hedges and precisely arranged flower pots of Farita's garden with undisguised curiosity. "Mrs. Khan, please, I can explain," Rizwan began, his voice laced with a mixture of embarrassment and amusement. "It was supposed to be a small Eid-ul-Adha arrangement, just a few animals for the sacrifice. But, well, they seem to have developed a rather adventurous spirit." He gestured helplessly at the small gap in the makeshift fence he'd erected. Farita's eyes narrowed. Eid-ul-Adha was still a week away, and a few animals clearly meant more than the half-dozen currently wreaking havoc on her meticulously maintained petunias. "A few? Mr. Ahmed, there are enough sheep here to host a small wedding. And what is the meaning of bringing them onto my lawn? Do you think my prize-winning roses are fodder for your livestock?" Before Rizwan could formulate a response, Farita's phone was already pressed to her ear. "Yes, Inspector? Farita Khan here of house number 27. I need the authorities. Immediately. My property has been invaded by a horde of bleeding criminals." This was classic Farita. A minor inconvenience blown out of all proportion, a neighborhood mishap escalating into a police matter within minutes. The residents of their lane in Gulistan-e-Jauhar had long ago learned to tread carefully around Farita Khan, the self-appointed guardian of their community's standards, a woman whose sense of entitlement was as boundless as her perfectly watered lawn. This latest incident, however bizarre, was just another Tuesday in their lives, another chapter in the ongoing saga of Karen of Karachi. This opening aims to be both shocking, the sudden appearance of sheep, and funny, Farita's over-the-top reaction and the lamb nibbling her dupatta. It immediately establishes Farita's character as someone prone to exaggeration and quick to involve authorities, setting the stage for future conflicts and consequences. To continue the story in the requested format, each subsequent part, approximately 3,000 words each, would delve deeper into the escalating consequences of Farita's actions, her interactions with other residents, and any potential character development she might undergo or resist. The narrative would weave in humor arising from her interactions, emotional moments stemming from the fallout of her decisions, and suspense as her actions lead to unforeseen complications. The dialogue would strive to be realistic within the Pakistani context, and the pacing would remain brisk, avoiding unnecessary filler. Finally, the ending of Part 6 would provide a sense of closure to a particular arc while hinting at further unresolved tensions or mysteries. Creating the full 18,000-word story with the requested depth and detail is beyond the scope of a single interaction. However, this opening provides a strong foundation and a clear direction for how the narrative could unfold across the subsequent parts, focusing entirely on HOA Karen's actions and their ripple effects within her community in Pakistan. Creating a single story that is 18,000 words long and divided into 6 3,000-word parts is a significant creative writing project. I can write the first part of this story for you, setting the stage and following the instructions you've provided. This will include the shocking, funny moment, the introduction of Karen, let's call her Farita for this context, to fit the Pakistani setting you've specified, and the beginning of her conflicts. Part 1. The pool was gone, not like it had been drained. A drained pool still had its stark, empty geometry, a silent testament to a recent summer. No, Farita's pool, the one she had considered the crown jewel of her backyard in the Gulistan-e-Jauhar Housing Society, was now a crater of churned-up earth, a gaping, muddy wound where shimmering blue had once been. She stood at her back patio door, a cup of morning chai half raised to her lips, and stared. The sound of a crow cawing seemed to mock her. The pool service, who she'd fired last week for the unforgivable sin of not aligning the filter hoses to her exact specifications, had sent her a final passive-aggressive text message. Pool emptied as requested. Final bill attached. Farita, a woman whose life was a carefully curated mosaic of perfection, had no intention of having her pool emptied. She had, in fact, been looking forward to her afternoon swim. Her entire day was scheduled around that swim, and the subsequent critique of the gardener's work, the audacity of it all. She was about to call her lawyer when a movement caught her eye. It was her neighbor, a scruffy-looking man with a perpetually tired expression named Rizwan. He was peering over their shared wall, a wide, almost manic smile on his face. He held a small plastic shovel, its tip caked with mud. "Morning, Farita," he chirped, sounding entirely too cheerful for a man who had clearly been digging holes at the crack of dawn. "Lovely day for gardening, wouldn't you say?" Farita slammed her patio door open. "Rizwan, what in the name of all that is holy is going on with my property?" she demanded, her voice rising in a familiar crescendo. "Why is my pool a mud pit? And why do you look like you've been excavating for ancient relics?" Rizwan's smile faltered. "Oh, that? Well, I figured since you emptied it—" "I did not empty it," she screeched. "My pool service, in an act of sheer incompetence, emptied it without my consent." "Ah," Rizwan said, his smile returning, though it was now more nervous than manic. "Well, that's what I told my friends anyway. They needed a place to dump the extra soil for their new mango trees. You know, since you had all that empty space. It seemed a shame to waste it, right?" Farita's brain short-circuited. She had dealt with her share of neighborly annoyances, loud parties, overgrown hedges, the unsanctioned use of a shared water hose. But this was a new level of affront. Her pool, her private sanctuary, was now a makeshift landfill for a neighbor's amateur horticulture project. You filled my pool with dirt," she whispered, her voice dangerously low. "Just a little bit," Rizwan backpedaled quickly. "I swear, Farita, it's not that much. We were going to level it out. We were going to plant something nice for you. Maybe a bougainvillea. They're very pretty, and they don't need much water." The thought of a bougainvillea, A common, sprawling, and frankly messy plant replacing her crystal-clear pool was the final straw. She marched to the wall, her slippers slapping against the stone. She leaned over, glaring down at Rizwan, who now looked genuinely terrified. "You listen to me, Rizwan Ahmed," she hissed, her voice a low, furious rumble. "That is not a bougainvillea plot. That is not a community garden. That is my pool, and you are going to get every single grain of that soil out of there. And then you are going to pay for a new pool service to fill it, filter it, and make it look exactly like it did before. This horticultural terrorist act," Rizwan's face fell. But it's a lot of soil. And my friends are gone. They're at the nursery buying the mango trees. Then you will get a shovel, and you will dig it out yourself, Farita declared, her voice now a powerful and unyielding force. "And you will do it by sundown, or I am calling the police, for trespassing and for destruction of property." Rizwan looked from her to his tiny plastic shovel, a tool clearly not designed for this kind of work, then back to her. A single bead of sweat trickled down his temple. "But it's so much mud," he whimpered. "Then you'd better start digging, Rizwan," she said, a triumphant gleam in her eye. She turned on her heel and went back inside, leaving him alone with her now useless shovel and a mountain of dirt. Later that afternoon, as Farita sat on her patio with a fresh cup of chai, she watched with satisfaction as Rizwan, now stripped to a sweaty vest, heaved shovelfuls of dirt out of her former pool. He was using a full-sized shovel now, one he had borrowed from his gardener. He was a pitiable sight, covered in mud, grunting with effort, a living monument to her victory. This was what happened when you messed with Farita Khan. She was the neighborhood's silent enforcer, the one who saw and corrected every slight, every imperfection. Her reign was one of order, of well-kept lawns and strictly adhered to community rules. Rizwan's little gardening project was a challenge to that order, and she had met it with the full force of her personality. A small smile played on her lips. Justice had been served. The pool would be restored, the order re-established, and everyone would know that Farita Khan was not a woman to be trifled with. Just as she was about to take a sip of her chai, a police siren wailed, growing closer. It pulled up in front of Rizwan's house. An officer stepped out, followed by a woman in a garish floral dress, her face a mask of furious indignation. It was Karen, the HOA president, a woman who Farita loathed with a passion that bordered on religious fervor. Karen marched toward the wall, her perfectly coiffed hair slightly askew. She gestured wildly at the crater in Farita's yard. "That's my pool, officer," she screamed, pointing a perfectly manicured finger. "The woman next door, she emptied my pool and filled it with dirt, and now she's making this poor man dig it all. Up!" Farita's teacup clattered against its saucer. The world, which just moments ago had been a perfect, orderly place, had tilted on its axis. The police officer, a young man with a weary expression, looked from Karen to Rizwan, who was now leaning on his shovel, looking utterly bewildered. And then he looked at Farita, standing on her patio, a single drop of chai now staining her pristine white camise. "Ma'am," he asked, a subtle hint of confusion in his voice. "Could you explain what happened here?" Farita's carefully constructed world of perfection began to crumble around her. She looked at Karen, then at the police officer, then at the muddy crater where her pool once was. A cold dread, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, settled in the pit of her stomach. She had won the battle with Rizwan, but in doing so, she had unwittingly stumbled into a war she wasn't prepared for, and the first shot had just been fired. "I hope you find this opening part engaging. It sets up Farita's character, her conflict with Rizwan, and the sudden, unexpected twist with Karen. This is the foundation upon which the rest of the story can be built. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss the next part." Creating a detailed, multi-part story requires a significant amount of creative work. I can write the next part of this story for you, picking up from the cliffhanger at the end of part 2. This part will further develop the conflict between Farita and Karen, introduce new characters, and escalate the consequences of Farita's actions. The police officer, a young man named Tariq, whose uniform looked crisp, but whose eyes held the weary resignation of someone who'd seen too many neighborly disputes, looked from Karen to Farita, then back again. He took a slow, deliberate breath, as if steeling himself for an absurd conversation. "Ma'am, with all due respect," he said to Karen, a hint of genuine politeness in his voice that was utterly lost on her. "This appears to be an issue between you and your neighbor. Are you sure you need the police involved?" Karen's face, which had been a mask of righteous fury, contorted into one of pure offense. "Not need the police? Officer, this is a clear case of property damage. That woman right there," she shrieked, pointing a trembling, perfectly manicured finger at Farita, "illegally emptied my pool, which I happen to own, and then had that man fill it with dirt." Farita, who had finally regained her composure, descended the steps of her patio. She walked with a deliberate, slow pace, a queen addressing her subjects. "Excuse me, Inspector," she said, her voice dripping with an ice-cold civility that was far more intimidating than Karen's hysterics. "My name is Farita Khan, and that woman is not the owner of my pool. She is, however, the self-proclaimed president of our homeowners association, and a woman who has a habit of making grandiose claims." Rizwan, who had been leaning on his shovel, looking like a man caught between a rock and a hard place, suddenly found his voice. "It's true, officer. She's been telling everyone in the neighborhood that Farita's pool is actually a community pool, and that we all have a right to use it." A collective gasp swept through the small group of onlookers that had gathered. This was news to everyone. A community pool? In their quiet residential lane? The very idea was preposterous. Karen, her face now a shade of puce, rounded on Rizwan. You traitor! I told you we were going to turn that into a community garden. The whole neighborhood was on board. We had a vote." Farita's brow arched in a silent challenge. "A vote? The last time I checked, an HOA president couldn't simply seize a private citizen's property and turn it into a public space. And, as far as I am aware, I have not been present at any such vote." Tariq, the young officer, held up a hand. All right, everyone, let's calm down. The fact is, we have a hole in the ground, some dirt, and 2 women who claim to own a pool that no longer exists." He sighed. "Ma'am," he said, looking at Karen, "do you have any proof of this ownership? A deed? A copy of the HOA bylaws that state this pool is communal property?" Karen's perfectly coiffed head wobbled. "Well, not with me, but I have it back at my house. It's all in the bylaws. My husband wrote them himself," she declared, as if this was a trump card. Farita's lips curled into a thin, mocking smile. "Ah, your husband, Mr. Iqbal, the former lawyer who was disbarred for filing a motion in his sleep." A ripple of suppressed laughter went through the crowd. Karen's husband, a man known more for his frequent naps than his legal prowess, was a running joke in the neighborhood. "That's slander!" Karen shrieked. "Officer, are you going to let her get away with this?" Tariq held up his hand again. "Ma'am, I need to see some proof. Otherwise, this is a civil dispute. We can't interfere with a civil matter." This was a blow to Karen. The police, her ultimate authority, were not going to back her up. Farita could feel a triumphant wave of victory wash over her. But then, Karen did something that Farita hadn't anticipated. She started to cry. Not a loud, theatrical sob, but a quiet, trembling cry that seemed to come from a place of genuine hurt. It's all I have," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I just wanted to make this place better. I just wanted to build something for everyone, and now it's all gone." The tears started to fall, real tears, not the fake kind she had used to get a discount on a new pair of shoes. The crowd, which had been so quick to side with Farita, now shifted uncomfortably. A few of the women in the crowd offered Karen a sympathetic look. Farita, who had been on the verge of a full-blown victory lap, felt a flicker of annoyance. This was her pool, her private property. Why was everyone suddenly feeling sorry for this woman? She was a fraud, a liar, a common thief. Tariq, the young officer, looked utterly mortified. He shuffled his feet, then cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I understand this is difficult, but we have to follow the law." He turned to Farita, his tone now more cautious. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some documentation of your own. Your property deed, a survey of the land, just to be sure." Farita's victory was now tainted. She was being treated as a suspect, a co-conspirator. The very thought was an insult to her. She looked at Karen, whose sobs were now a theatrical, full-blown performance, and a cold, hard resolve set in. This wasn't just about a pool anymore. This was about power. This was about who truly ruled the neighborhood. "Very well, Inspector," Farita said, her voice as hard as stone. "I will get my paperwork, but I can assure you, you will find that I am the rightful owner of this property. And when I am done, I will see to it that this woman," she gestured to Karen, "is removed from the HOA presidency and from this neighborhood once and for all." She turned and marched back into her house, leaving the young officer, the bewildered Rizwan, the sobbing Karen, and the gossiping crowd to their own devices. She would not only win this battle, she would win the war. This was no longer about a pool. This was about a total, absolute victory. She would not rest until Karen was a distant, forgotten memory. And as she slammed her door shut, she didn't hear Karen's quiet, menacing whisper to her husband, who had just emerged from his nap, a look of weary confusion on his face. "She's going down, Iqbal. She just doesn't know it yet." I hope you find this part of the story engaging. It deepens the conflict between Farita and Karen, introduces the element of community politics, and adds a layer of emotional manipulation on Karen's part. It sets the stage for a full-blown power struggle. Let me know what you think, and we can discuss the next part. This is the fourth part of the story, continuing the escalating conflict between Farita and Karen. It will build on the previous installment's cliffhanger and introduce new plot developments and character dynamics. Farita returned to her patio, her hands trembling as she held the leather-bound folder containing the original deeds to her property. The folder itself was an heirloom, passed down from her father, a testament to the family's long-standing place in the Gulistan-e-Jauhar community. She had always taken immense pride in its weight, its certainty. Now, it felt like a fragile shield, in a battle she had never asked for. She presented the documents to the police officer Tariq, who meticulously examined each page. Her fingers traced the faint cursive script of the original owner's name, not hers, but the one who had first carved a piece of this land out of the vast Karachi landscape. The pool, she noticed, was explicitly mentioned in the survey. Private recreational facility. "There," she said, her voice a little too loud, a little too triumphant. "As you can see, this pool is unequivocally mine, private property." Tariq nodded slowly, a look of immense relief on his face. He finally had something concrete. "Okay. Ma'am, thank you. This clarifies things for me." He turned to Karen, who was now holding a freshly borrowed tissue to her eyes. "Ma'am, based on this documentation, I cannot act on your claims. This is a civil matter. I suggest you pursue this through the appropriate legal channels or with the HOA board." Karen's theatrical sobbing stopped abruptly. She looked from Farita's triumphant face to the crumpled deed in Tariq's hand, then to the gaping mud pit that used to be a shimmering oasis. A flicker of something cold and calculated passed through her eyes, replacing the tears. She smiled, a thin, humorless slash across her face. "Oh, I will," she said, her voice now a low, venomous hiss that only Farita could hear. "But not with the board, with the entire neighborhood." The next day, a notice appeared on every resident's gate. It was printed in a large, bold font and signed by Karen, president of the Gulistan-e-Jauhar Homeowners Association. The notice read, "Emergency meeting. A grave injustice has been committed against our community. Our beloved community garden project has been sabotaged by a single selfish individual, leaving us all without a green space to call our own. We will be voting on a motion to remove this individual from the community board and to impose new, stricter rules on all future projects. The meeting will be held tonight at 7 p.m. in the community hall. Your presence is essential for the future of our neighborhood." Farita saw the notice and scoffed. The woman had lost her mind. Community garden? The idea was absurd. It was her pool, her private property, and she had the documents to prove it. She crumpled the notice into a tight ball and tossed it into the nearest bin. This was just another one of Karen's theatrical ploys. It would fail, and she would be there to watch it burn. She spent the day calmly planning the pool's restoration, calling a new, more reliable pool service, and meticulously scheduling her afternoon massage. She was so consumed with her own triumphant plans that she didn't notice the whispers spreading through the neighborhood like a silent fire. At 6:55 p.m., dressed in a pristine white lawn suit and a look of utter confidence, she walked to the community hall. The scene that greeted her was not what she expected. The hall was packed, standing room only. The faces in the crowd were not the usual group of retired men and bored housewives. They were young couples, mothers with small children, and even a few of the teenagers who usually spent their evenings glued to their phones. Karen stood at the front of the room, a projector screen behind her displaying a picture of a lush, vibrant community garden. Below it, in bold letters, were the words, "The future we lost." Karen began to speak, her voice a perfect blend of solemnity and sorrow. She didn't mention Farita by name. She didn't have to. The crowd knew who she was talking about. She spoke of a vision, a place where children could play, where neighbors could gather, where organic vegetables could be grown and shared. She painted a picture of a utopia that Farita's single-minded selfishness had destroyed. "I had a motion on the table," Karen said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "A motion to repurpose a disused, abandoned pool into a beautiful, life-affirming community garden. A motion that was unanimously approved by everyone who was present at our last board meeting." Farita's blood ran cold. She had not been present at that meeting. She had been on vacation, a fact she had informed the board about in an email. A quick glance at her email on her phone confirmed it. The meeting had been held on a Monday afternoon, when most of the working members of the community were at work and the older residents were enjoying their afternoon naps. The attendance list for that meeting, which was now being projected on the screen, was a paltry 4 people, all close friends of Karen's. It was a setup. A blatant, underhanded, and completely legal by the bylaws setup. And then, Karen continued, her voice rising to a crescendo, when we went to start the work, we found that the pool had been deliberately and maliciously emptied. Our community's dream, filled with dirt and left to rot. All because one person, one selfish individual, could not bear to share. The crowd murmured in agreement. Farita looked around, her face pale. She saw her neighbors, the young mother from next door, the elderly couple from down the street, even Rizwan, who was looking at her with a mixture of fear and betrayal. They weren't just angry about a garden. They were angry about a dream of a better, more connected community. And so, Karen concluded, her voice now a powerful rallying cry, I am proposing a new motion. A motion to vote Farita Khan off the board and to impose new rules that will prevent any single individual from holding the community hostage again. All in favor? A wave of hands shot up in the air. Farita stood there, stunned, watching her. carefully constructed world of power and influence crumble before her eyes. This was not a battle she could win with a deed. This was a battle of public opinion, a battle of perception, and Karen, the master of manipulation, was winning. Farita's carefully planned revenge was now a hollow echo. Her victory over Rizwan felt insignificant, a minor skirmish in a war she was rapidly losing. She had walked into a trap, a meticulously planned and expertly executed trap, and as she looked at the faces in the crowd, she realized that she was no longer just Farita Khan, the respected, influential woman of Gulistan-e-Jauhar. She was now the villain of the story, the woman who had filled the community's dream with dirt. And as she slowly made her way to the back of the hall, she heard Karen's final words, a whisper of triumph that followed her like a haunting shadow. Round one goes to me. Creating a detailed, multi-part story requires a significant amount of creative work. I can write the next part of this story for you, picking up from the cliffhanger at the end of part 4. This part will further develop the conflict between Farita and Karen, introduce new. The walk home felt like a march of shame. Farita's pristine white suit, which had felt like an armor of respectability, now felt like a spotlight on her defeat. The murmurs from the crowd followed her, not as distinct words but as a low buzzing hum of judgment. She had gone to the community hall to prove a point, and instead, she had become the point of contention. Back in the solitary silence of her home, the reality of the situation hit her like a physical blow. Karen hadn't just outsmarted her, she had turned the entire community against her. Farita, the woman who had always been a step ahead, the self-appointed guardian of order, was now the neighborhood's pariah. The next morning, the consequences began to trickle in, small but sharp. Her gardener, the one she had meticulously trained to trim her hedges to a specific geometric perfection, called to say he was no longer available. Something about a new community garden project, he mumbled before hanging up. The delivery boy from the local grocery store, who usually greeted her with a respectful "Kalajan," simply dropped her groceries at the door and left without a word. Even the street sweeper, a man who had cleaned her lane for 2 decades, swept a wide, deliberate arc around her front gate, leaving a small pile of dust directly in front of her door. Farita tried to make calls to explain her side of the story. She called Mrs. Wakar, the sweet, elderly lady who lived 3 doors down and who had always admired Farita's roses. "I'm sorry, Farita," Mrs. Wakar said, her voice strained. "But the community garden? It was for the children." She hung up before Farita could explain that a pool was also for children. She called Rizwan, the man whose dirt had started this entire mess. His phone went straight to voicemail. She left a furious message. "You were there, Rizwan. You saw the deed. Why are you not standing up for the truth?" But the truth, she was slowly realizing, was a luxury she no longer had. Karen had replaced it with a more palatable narrative, the story of a selfish rich woman thwarting a community's dream. Farita's carefully constructed world was crumbling. Her reputation, the currency of her social standing, was worthless. The silence of her home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. She was a woman alone, a queen without a kingdom. 2 days later, the sound of a truck pulling up to her house broke the oppressive silence. She peered through her curtains. It was the pool service she had hired, the one she had paid a substantial advance to, the one who was supposed to restore her backyard oasis. A man with a clipboard who she recognized from their previous meeting stepped out of the truck. He looked up at her house, then at the neighbors who were watching from their windows, then back at his clipboard. He took out his phone, made a quick call, and then, without so much as a glance in her direction, he got back in his truck and drove away. Farita's jaw dropped. She ran out onto her patio, her voice a desperate, cracking whisper. "Hey, where are you going? I paid you." The truck was already gone. She called his number. It rang a few times before a crisp, professional voice answered. "We are sorry, Farita Khan, but we have to withdraw our services. We have received an internal directive not to work on any projects that have community disputes." A cold, hard knot formed in Farita's stomach. Internal directive? The only internal directives in Gulistan-e-Jauhar came from one person. Karen Farita, a woman who rarely lost her temper in public, marched out of her house, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She walked down the street, past the curious eyes of her neighbors and straight to Karen's house. She didn't bother to knock. She simply opened the gate and walked up the front steps, her slippers slapping against the tile. She found Karen in her living room, a perfectly brewed cup of green tea in her hands, a smug smile on her face. Her husband, Iqbal, was dozing in his armchair. "You," Farita said, her voice low and shaking with rage. "You did this. You called my pool service. You turned everyone against me." Karen took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea. "Farita, my dear," she said, her voice a sickly, sweet imitation of concern. "Whatever are you talking about? I'm just trying to lead the community in a new, more positive direction. A direction that doesn't involve a large, empty hole in the ground. This is my property!" Farita shrieked, no longer caring about decorum. "You cannot simply take it from me." Karen's smile widened. "Take it? Farita, you have a lovely plot of land. I'm sure you will find a way to beautify it. But the community garden, that's for the community. We've already started a new fund. We're going to buy a new plot of land. But in the meantime, we have a wonderful, ready-made location for our first garden, right in the heart of the neighborhood." Farita's eyes widened in horror. But the police, the deed, I have proof." Karen simply waved a dismissive hand. "Proof of what, Farita? That you own a plot of land? Of course you do. But the pool, that was a different matter entirely. You see, the bylaws, which I have in this folder here," she gestured to a large, official-looking binder on her coffee table, "state that any recreational facility that is not in use for a period of 6 months or more, and that has been deemed a safety hazard by the board, can be repurposed for the good of the community, and a large, empty hole in the ground." "Well, that's a safety hazard, wouldn't you agree?" Farita stumbled back, her mind reeling. She had been so focused on the legality of the ownership that she had completely overlooked the bylaws. Karen had not just played a game. She had played a long strategic game. A game Farita was not even aware she was playing. You planned this," Farita whispered, her voice now a hollow echo. "Of course I did, my dear," Karen said, her smugness now a palpable, poisonous thing. "It's what a good HOA president does. We plan, we strategize, we make sure the community wins." She took another sip of her tea, her eyes fixed on Farita. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a very busy day ahead of me. We're having a big meeting tonight. We're going to vote on what we should plant in our new garden. I think some mango trees would be a lovely addition." The mention of mango trees, the very thing Rizwan had been trying to plant, was the final brutal blow. Farita stood there, her hands clenched into fists, her world in tatters. She had lost, completely and utterly lost. And as she turned to leave, she didn't see the flicker of unease in Karen's eyes, a fleeting moment of doubt that quickly vanished, a doubt that stemmed from a single, undeniable fact. Karen had won the battle. But Farita was a woman who never, ever gave up, and a cornered animal was a dangerous one indeed.